welcome back to Books with Brandywine. Today I wanted to go over the Mage Quest that is part of the Book Junkie Trials. I have completed the first 5 books of the trials, which are the quests for the mages that lead us to the Bookie Grail, which is Stardust, and I have completed those first 5 books. I will be doing another wrap-up video that will have more books in it, because there are 17 books total in the Book Junkie Trials, and I am planning on reading all 17 of those books. So that wrap-up is going to be very long. So I figured I would talk about the first 5 since they're in a nice cohesive chunk, and then I could talk about the other 12 in the second video and cut down that video by like 5 or 10 minutes. So the 5 books are these. We had War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, which was for the Orc Grove prompt. We had The Mapmaker Chronicles, Race to the End of the World by A.L. Tait, which was for the Old Pirate Cove prompt. We have Savvy by Ingrid Law, which was for Glimmer. We have Hatching Magic by Anne Downer, which was for the Draconic Isles. And we have Stardust by Neil Gaiman, which was the Book Junkie, or Bookie Grail for the Book Junkie Trials. So the way the trials worked is there were like 17 locations on the map, and I believe they said 17. And there's 4 teams, and each team had a different route that they were taking to try and get to the Bookie Grail, which is Stardust. And since I'm a mage, the route that I was taking was mostly along the outside of the country, going through like the islands on the ocean. And so I had mixed feelings about these 5 books. For the most part, I liked them, but we will get into that. So for the first book, it was for Orc Grove, I believe it was called, and that was that the orcs are a bloodthirsty race, and in order to better understand them, we were to read a book that was gory, gritty, or gruesome. And so I chose War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, and I didn't really have much to go on to try and figure out if it was gory or not, but it had a sentence that was in the excerpt, that I'm not sure where in the book that is, that was saying that the aliens did not have bodies or digestive systems, just heads pretty much. And so in order to get nourishment, they had to suck the blood straight out of humans and go straight into their system. And so that was how they would survive. And I was like, well, that sounds pretty gruesome to me. So I did read the book. It didn't turn out to be as gruesome as I was worried it was going to be, which is good because this book also counted as my weakness, which was to read a book out of my comfort zone. Any scary or gory or gruesome books are out of my comfort zone. And so I loved this book. I did not know that it was going to be taking place, I think in 1900 or early 1900s, 1909 or somewhere around there. And it's in England. And so, I don't know why, I thought it was going to take place in the 1950s, and I think the reason that I thought that was because in 1936, there was a radio program that was an adaptation of this book, and it scared people so much that there was mass panic, because they thought that the world really was being invaded by aliens. And I thought that that radio podcast took place in the 1950s, but it actually took place in 1936. And it doesn't say it on here, I forget what his name was, but the guy that did it actually went on to make really big movies that we've all heard of that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. And so this book was all in first person. It follows the account of a man that was living near where the first alien crash landed, and it follows him for 2 weeks, I believe it is, from the time that, actually it starts before they crash landed. So it might be a little bit over 2 weeks. Because it actually starts with him seeing the aliens being launched off of Mars, but not knowing that that's what was going on. I think they thought it was like a volcano or something. And then them starting to crash land on Earth, and him realizing that a new alien spaceship was going to be crash landing every 10 days. Or no, every day for 10 days. And so it follows all of the mass destruction that was going on. And it's actually 2 books that are included in one book. So the first book starts out with his perspective, and then it changes over to his brother's perspective. The whole book is written 6 years after the events that were taking place. And so he's had time to catch up with his brother and talk to him and find out what was going on with him in other locations around the world, because they do try to get from England to another country. And so the first book follows the two of them. And then the second book follows him after he's gotten stuck in a building with another guy that is one of those kinds of guys that's like super whiny and worthless and won't do anything. And so it follows his interactions with him and them being stuck in this house right next to one of the crash sites. And so, like, honestly, like, it was really slow, I feel like, because, you know, he's describing a lot of things, but I was fascinated. I could not stop reading it. And as I was reading this, it really made me want to see what a modern perspective of this book would be. Because, like, this book did take place in the 1900s when they're still having horse-drawn buggies. And I was like, I wonder what would happen in this day and age with us having text messaging and us having, you know, computers and social media, and how word would spread instantly. Whereas one of the issues in this book was that nobody knew what was going on, because everybody that was trying to spread the word got killed. And so then people that were in London that were trying to contact them and find out more information about what was going on was like, oh, well, it must not be real because they're not responding to us when the people were dead. So they couldn't respond. And so, and I was like, you know, this day and age, people would have like taken pictures of it. It would have immediately been on the internet. It would have gone worldwide in 3 seconds. And so, so it kind of made me want to watch the Tom Cruise version. I haven't watched it yet because it's not on Netflix and I don't have the copy of the movie, but 4th of July just happened and I was watching Independence Day. And as I was watching it, I realized that is the modern version of this book. A lot of things that are in this book do overlap with that movie, Independence Day. And now I'm very strongly convinced they read this book before they made that movie. So I would definitely suggest it to everyone. The book's just awesome. The next book was The Mapmaker Chronicles: Race to the End of the World. And this was for Old Pirate Cove, which was to read a book that takes place at least partially on the sea, so that we can have our knowledge of the ocean to deal with the pirates. And so I actually really enjoyed this book a lot more than I was expecting to. I did buy it at the same time as I bought Star of Datora and The Impossible Quest, and I didn't really enjoy those books as much as I hoped to enjoy them, so I wasn't expecting to enjoy this book. I mostly just picked it because it was so thin, but I actually really enjoyed this book. This book did remind me a lot of the Brother Band Chronicles in that they end up visiting what I would assume is the Americas, and so that, like, the states that or the countries they're coming from aren't called like England and America and stuff, but just based on the type of people that they encountered once they reached the other landmass, and the way that the villages were set up, and even later when they got further north and found a castle, and the way that was organized, it very much screamed like the Vikings to me visiting or coming over. And so I felt like, even though like the different countries weren't named after specific countries, I felt like they were very much based on those other countries. But I did really enjoy it. That Norwell that's in that picture actually comes in to play a few times in the book. And I enjoyed seeing how the boy grew during his adventures and his interactions with his friends. He does have, I don't want to call it a photogenic memory. There's a name for it, and I don't remember what it is. But when you can remember every single thing that you've ever, like, done or seen or heard, he does not forget anything. And so that is like an ability that they're kind of trying to hide from everyone else, because obviously it would get very weird if people knew about that. It does also address the fact that he and everybody else thinks that the world is flat, and so when they're going to adventure, he's very convinced that he's going to fall off the edge of the world. And there's like some people that are starting to introduce the idea of the planet being a globe. And he's like, no, there's a dragon at the end of the earth that we all fall into the what do they call those things? the mouth of. And so it was cool to see how, like, his perception of the world is changing. This is the first book, and I think a series of 4, and now I actually am curious to read the rest of the books and see what other adventures they go on. He is competing against 2 other boats and 2 other map makers in this book, and so that's interesting to see, because one of the other map makers is friends with him. One is, like, a mortal enemy because he's a rich prick, and the other, like, the captains of the ships are not the best people. They do very, very questionable things. And so, I don't know, I enjoyed this book so much more than I was expecting to. And so, I'm looking forward to getting the rest of the books in the series. The next book that I read for Glimmer was Savvy by Ingrid Law. This book, I had mixed feelings on. So, when I first started reading the book, I was extremely confused because, on the one hand, I loved the concept of the Savvy, which is basically superpowers, there's no other way to say it, that each person in her family develops at the age of 13. And this has been going on for so many generations that they're spread, like, everywhere. They have all kinds of crazy awesome powers. Her brother can control electricity, her other brother can control storm, or cause storms. He can't really control it yet, and his brother can't really control the electricity. Her mom's Savvy is that everything she does turns out perfect. Even if she makes mistakes, they are perfect mistakes. Her grandfather's Savvy is that he can, like, move the earth and create whole, new land, like, in the earth, like, bringing it up. Her grandmother could trap sound waves in jars. And they have cousins that can do different stuff. And so, like, she's really, really excited because she's about to turn 13 and get her Savvy. And they have no way of knowing what the Savvy is going to be. It could be anything. And so I liked that the way that they described the Savvy and the way that her family is living really, really made sense. Like, this is how people would live in our world if they did have some sort of powers that magically showed themselves at age 13. Like, the way they described it, like, I feel like it was so realistic as to how that would work in our world. Especially because nobody else in the world knows about these people with their Savvy. And so, I loved that part. What I didn't necessarily like is her adventure that she goes on and why she goes on it and what she does. Admittedly, like, I could kind of understand, like, at 13, well, maybe not at 13. I think at, like, age 9, I would have had her level of precociousness, but not necessarily at age 13, because she ends up sneaking aboard this pink bus and bringing along her friend and his sister and her brother and her little brother, who was already hiding on the bus. And so, they end up going on this adventure, and, you know, the police are searching for them because they're missing and causing all sorts of trouble. And so, at first, like, I was really bugged because I was just like, I really didn't like that she was going, like, the reason she was on this bus and the actions that they took while they were on the bus. But at the same time, I really liked, like, the rules of the universe, I guess that is how you would say it. But then by the time I got, like, 3/4 of the way through, I actually really started enjoying it. And the other characters that came into play and watching some of the character growth that was going on for multiple characters had character growth that was going on. And so by the end of the book, I actually really enjoyed it. And I really liked how it ended. And so now I'm kind of considering picking up the rest of the series, but I haven't quite decided yet because I liked it, but I didn't super love it, if that makes sense. But I did really, really enjoy the rules of the universe that are in the series, and so that really makes me want to pick up the other books just to continue reading about the rules that are of the superhero system that are in this book. So, I don't know yet. We'll see. I have heard that people absolutely love that book and that was their favorite book. And maybe if I had read it when I was much younger and in middle school, I probably would have liked it a lot more than I liked it right now. So I really wish I had read that book when I was really young, but unfortunately I read it now. The next book was Hatching Magic, and I read this for the Draconic Isles, which is an isle that was completely covered in dragons and wyverns, and we were to read a book that had dragons in it. And so, obviously, there's a dragon on the cover. There's a dragon in these books. So, this book was specifically to be about wyverns. I did not like this book. I actually had to, like, force myself to finish reading it because it was really just annoying me so much. So, the first thing that annoyed me, if you can see this tarot card, they said it's a tarot card. It's not really focusing. This card played a major part in the book. But if you look at the wyvern, it's got 4 legs and wings. That's not a wyvern. But in the book, it says it's a wyvern. In fact, it has a specific quote to deal with it. And let me see if I can find it. Okay. So, it says, Wicca flexed her claws and began to give herself a leisurely manicure, cat fashion. She fit in well among the ramparts, being about the size of the stone gargoyle waterspouts. She was a small, 4-legged dragon with a neat, slender head and an eagle's beak. No matter what old bestiaries and modern dictionaries have to say on the matter, wyverns do have forelimbs as well as hind limbs, and a set of powerful membranous flapping wings like those of a bat. Wyverns are the most cat-like of the dragons in their agility, intelligence, temperament, and vanity. And like a cat, Wicca has slitted feline eyes, retractable claws, and a deep, melodious purr. And so, basically, the wyverns in this book are used to track down, like, spells and demons and be able to help everything in the wizarding world. They are usually bonded to a wizard who has a chain, as they show in the tarot card. She had a chain around her neck, and they can be turned against the wizard, and if they do get turned against the wizard, it usually dies, like, ends up in their death and the wizard's death. So that was, like, the first thing that really bugged me, and that was on the second page, was that the wyvern has 4 limbs and wings. And it seems like such a small thing, but the whole definition of a wyvern is that it only has the hind limbs and the wings. That's its whole definition. And so that really, really bugged me. The other thing that bugged me about this book was that I expected it to be all about this girl whose dad is a biologist and it is off trying to find anything. I think I read the back wrong, so I thought that he was off searching for dragons, and then she ends up finding a dragon and raising it, and while he's gone, but that's not at all what the story is about. He is gone, but he's a biologist that in a world where dragons don't exist, and so they are trying to prove, like, he's trying to find any kind of animal, like in Laos, like he's not specifically searching for dragons because dragons don't exist in the world. And she doesn't even come across the dragon egg until really late in the book. And it turns out there's actually 4 different storylines, I think 4, that they're following. Yeah, 4. So they're following her storyline, and she's basically obsessed with this game called Wizards and Wyverns, which is pretty much like Magic the Gathering. And so she's just obsessed with that. And then they're following Wicca, who's trying to find the proper nest to lay her egg and hatch her baby. And they're following the wizard, Galadian, something. I don't know. He's running around with a guy named Merlin. And they're following their storyline as they're trying to find Wicca. And they're following the storyline of an evil wizard, Kobold, and his demon sidekick, who are trying to find Gideon so they can kill Gideon. And so, I don't know, I didn't like that there was 4 different storylines that were going on. I particularly didn't like the little girl's storyline, even though I thought the whole book was going to be about her. She actually annoyed me the most. As it is, I could relate to her obsession with Wizards and Wyverns. At that age, I was obsessed with Pokemon, and a little older than that, I was obsessed with Magic the Gathering. And I did go through some pretty extreme things to try and get the cards that I wanted. So I could kind of relate to that, but at the same time, it just really, really annoyed me. The whole book really annoyed me, honestly. I don't know. I don't know how to describe what was annoying me. It just didn't jive right with me. And it should have. it had all of, like, the makings of the things that should have jived with me, but it just didn't. So, and that's not to say that it's a bad book. I mean, it's probably a good book. Like, to somebody else, they probably loved it. It just wasn't my thing. The last book that I read for the Mage Quest was Neil Gaiman's The Stardust. This was actually a reread for me, and we did have the option of reading a book that was a quest for a lost item if we had already read Stardust, but I loved Stardust and I really wanted to read it again, and it's short, so it works perfect for the readathon since I'm trying to read all 17 books. So, as I said, this book was a reread. To see my initial reactions to it, I have a video that shows all of my reactions, especially my reactions to the explicit parts, which I was not expecting. Those parts didn't bother me as much in the second reading because I was expecting them this time, and there were only 2. And then there were a few curse words, which again, I was expecting this time. The problem that I mostly had with it the first time was that I kept comparing it to the movie. And because this was my second reading of it, and I didn't know everything that was going to happen, I actually found that I didn't even think of the movie once while reading it the second time. Instead, I was comparing it in my mind to the first time that I had read it, and seeing if my reactions to different areas were the same. And so I enjoyed the book a lot more. There were definitely things that I noticed in it the second reading that I didn't notice in the first reading, which is to be expected. That's why we reread books, so we can see more things the second time that we didn't see in the first time. So, like, one of the complaints that I had, again, in the first time I read it, was that it seemed like we didn't see that they were falling in love until the very, very end, when it was like, all right, they're in love. And that really bugged me. And then I thought about it, and I was like, well, maybe it's because we were seeing it from his perspective, and he didn't realize he was in love until he realized he was in love, which was at the very end. And when I was going through and reading it in this one, I noticed that that was very much true. Because we were seeing it from his perspective, we didn't see that they were falling in love. But other characters did see that they were falling in love, and so comments would be made about it. Like, at one point, he's with one of his uncles, and his uncle makes the comment that, of course, he is, like, thinking weird stuff. He's in love. And he was like, how does he know I'm in love? I haven't mentioned Victoria Forrester once. And they're on their way to try and find the star. So he hasn't even met the star. He just knows from the way that the boy's acting and the way the boy's been talking that he is in love with the star. But the boy doesn't realize it yet. The boy thinks that he's talking about Victoria Forrester. And he's not. And so when I read that, and that part is like maybe like halfway through the book, I was like, okay, so they did start falling in love before, and they did show it in that other characters were seeing it. We just didn't see it because we were seeing it from the boy's point of view, and he didn't see it. And so, like, finding stuff like that in the second reading just made it so much better for me. I'm really, really glad I read it again. Definitely still keeping it. Definitely going to be reading it again in the future, I'm sure. This is going to become one of my favorite fairy tale books. I almost said fairy tale retellings, but it isn't a fairy tale retelling. It's like an original fairy tale, and I love it. But it's very much written in the style of, like, the old fairy tales with all the dark pieces, you know, kept in. And so I really love that too, because I'm like, it feels so much like an old fairy tale, but it's a modern book. And so another thing that bothered me before was how short the pirate scene was, because, you know, I was comparing it to the movie. But that, and they're not even pirates, I keep calling them pirates, but in the book they're not actually pirates. They do, like, capture lightning, but I don't think they're pirates. But like, it felt like smooth in it, reading it the second time, because the way they have to run from thing to thing to thing. I loved this book so much more the second time. I loved it the first time, but I loved it even more the second time. And I'm actually looking forward to reading this again someday. Soon, probably. I think I read this last time in, like, January or February, and then now I'm reading it in July, so yeah. But yes, so definitely enjoyed this book. So those were all of the books that I read for the Mage part of the quest for the Holy Grail, Bookie Grail, for the Bookie Grail. And now, like, later I will make a video for the rest of the books that I'm going to be reading as I explore the Queendom. I don't know if I'm going to do one video or if I'm going to do multi-parts of the video, because those are 12 more books, but we will see. But here were the first 5 books that I read for the Book Junkie Trials. I hope you guys have a great day. See you later.